Hi, I'm back with another On Music show. Um, I wanted to make the next On Music a continuation of the last one, which was me kind of going through stuff that I've recently gotten into or gotten back into, mainly via YouTube, and discussing some bands and albums that I'd recommend from that lot. But I've decided instead, this week was Tony Iommi's 73rd birthday, and I've decided to do another Black Sabbath video. I know. I'm actually going to split it into two videos, but at least this will be a complete piece. Um, so let me tell you about, in order to set this up, let me tell you about something I did uh, back in, I'm looking at my cheat sheet here on the other side of the screen. February 15th, 2014, the day after kind of Halloween, Valentine's, I published an article on my old blog, henrycovert.com, and it was called Black Sabbath Reincarnations. And then the subtitle is 25 Black Sabbath albums, counting down the discography by Henry Covert. So that is what I did. All of their albums from Black Sabbath, the debut, up until the live record Gathered in Their Masses, which they recorded on the tour called The End, which was indeed the swan song of the band, period. They disbanded in 2017. So they had a 49, 48, depending on how you look at it. If you look at the formation of the band, that's when they congealed as the classic four, then 49 years. If you count how long they used the Black Sabbath name, 48 years. So for this article, I wrote an introduction about Black Sabbath. I'm going to go ahead and read this to you. I don't know how well or bad it reads, how well or ill. I'm not going to read the entries in the 25, all 25 entries. I'm going to just discuss them. And it's not going to be 25. I'm going to do 19 studio albums. All of the 19 studio albums under the name Black Sabbath. It's tempting to round it up to 20 and include the album by the incarnation of the band that was called Heaven and Hell. Their album, The Devil You Know. Very tempting. I might try to figure out where I would slot it in the 19, but I don't know. It wouldn't be super high. It'd be in this first part. So I'm going to count backwards. So we're going to start with 19, and this episode we're going to go back to number 11. And the next episode I'm going to count down my 10 favorite Black Sabbath albums in order. All of these are in order. So I'm going to use this order here as a guide. It hasn't really changed any in the last 6-7 years, the order of the albums. But my thoughts have changed a little, and I think my writing is pretty solid. I just reread some of this, but I don't want to just read you what I wrote. I'll put a link. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description if you want to go and just go right to the article, read it, and see all the pictures I assembled. Some pretty cool shots. In the background, I'm listening to one of the 9 albums I'll be covering tonight. It's on YouTube, so when this cuts off, I don't know if a Sabbath album will start after this. I may play one over here to continue the mood. The one I'm playing in the background is The Eternal Idol from 1987. I did a pretty extensive earlier On Music show about that era. It just kind of happened to fall because the other videos were me talking about my experiences with Black Sabbath and how I came to them and developed through the years. And 1987 was really, I guess, one of the first years, probably the second year, I was kind of a fully realized Sabbath fan in that I was getting a new album as it came out, and I had heard the majority of their material prior to that, maybe all of it by then, I'm not sure. First of those such albums was Seventh Star in 1986. So I had a lot to say about that era because it was really I was really involved in it as it was happening. It was really fresh to me. So let me read you this introduction to the Black Sabbath Reincarnations. I still like as an article title, by the way. Could have been a good album title for them. So if I see some errors or some dodgy stuff in here, I'll correct it. But let's give it a go, as that chapter always says. Black Sabbath is a British heavy metal band formed in 1968 as the Polka Talk Blues Band. Then they became known as Earth. After guitarist Tony Iommi spent 2 weeks in Jethro Tull, he returned to Earth, the band. At that point, bassist lyricist Geezer Butler changed the outfit's name to Black Sabbath after the Mario Bava horror film of that name. The blues rock group amped up its sound to match its evocative new name, and Butler began penning more occult lyrics, while Iommi crafted unforgettably heavy riffs. In late 1969, they recorded their eponymous debut LP and introduced a powerful new sound and morose attitude to rock. This was codified in early 1970 with their hit LP Paranoid, which took their dark sound and nihilistic lyrics to brain-blasting new levels. Sabbath went on to become one of the most successful bands of the 1970s and to influence countless acts, spawning whole subgenres of heavy music. So that's the beginning of the introduction. So I'm going to do here, since I'm never going to get back around to those other videos where I was talking about like myth conceptions and facts and clearing up interesting tidbits that are really true, as opposed to rumor and just misinformation, disinformation. I hate that. So I'm going to clarify a few things from each of these periods as I go through this before I get into the 9 countdown. So it's probably be a long video. I'm warning you. So first thing is Earth did record a demo with several songs. One was called The Rebel, the most memorable one. I think there were 4 songs. I'm blanking on the names of the others right now. Believe it or not, there are a couple of Black Sabbath facts that even I occasionally blank on. I'll remember it as soon as the video is over. Rebel's great. Earth was great, but Earth essentially was Black Sabbath. Mario Bava's Black Sabbath, the film, came out in 1963 in Italy. I believe it's also played here in America in 63. It could have been 64 when it debuted in America. But the story goes that Geezer Butler went to go see the movie. I assume a re-release in the theater, or actually it's conceivable he could have seen it in Britain in 1963 or 1964. He would have been about 15 years old, and maybe it stuck with him. Less possible, but slightly possible, is he may have seen it a rerun on television, but I don't know how Britain was for rerunning things like that on the regular stations back then. You got to remember, these guys lived in Birmingham. They were dirt poor. Some of the members of the band didn't have indoor plumbing. It was quite bleak, an industrialized town. Major thing of note here to do with their sound is that when he was 15 years old, Tony Iommi, who I think his father, well, he was working in shop, and his father and him had a shop, where they did industrial kind of stuff and woodworking and all kinds of stuff. So during one of these sessions working, he accidentally cut off. Okay, let me get this straight here, because we're going back. He's left-handed, so he cut off these 2 fingers up to around here, and so he figured that was it. He'd been playing guitar, and then he decided, well, gosh, I guess it's over with. And his dad wanted him to try to somehow become a doctor. I didn't have enough money probably to send him to school. But he came up with an ingenious idea. He had read about the guitarist Django Reinhardt, who had a couple of, I don't know if he was left-handed or not, so I'm not sure which fingers, but his middle 2 fingers had gotten screwed up in a fire. They practically kind of melded together almost, so he didn't have full movement. Tony was inspired because Django was a virtuoso despite that. And yes, I'm pretty sure the film character Django is named after Django Reinhardt, the guitar player. I could be wrong. It's a It's an Eastern European name, but that's just my current theory. That's not a fact. I'll distinguish what's a fact and what's a theory. But my theories are pretty well informed and pretty well reasoned, so I'm usually right about them, about stuff I know a huge amount about. Not always. I'll admit when I'm wrong. So inspired by Django Reinhardt, he used the shop to forge out of plastic artificial prosthetic fingertips to go over these fingertips. And so he also changed his guitar to light gauge, super light gauge strings, so he wouldn't have as much problem playing or bending strings, because anybody who's played heavy gauge strings, especially if the action's not really low, that's the space from the string to the fretboard, it can really be tough on your fingers, like metal strings. I had to restring my 7-string guitar to super low gauge. I think that's right, low gauge, high gauge. Yes, low gauge. So essentially, much thinner, much less heavy, less metallic feeling, more sensitive to sound, which everything is anyway when you play electric guitar. But this kind of combination of factors led Tony also to turn things up louder and to kind of, really experiment around with the sound, try to get the right sound that he wanted and to get the right bends. And he did a lot of bends, and he also did a lot of fretboard kind of movement of the fretboard, shaking to get sounds, vibrations. Those are all things that became integral in his riffs for Black Sabbath. So you could say his accident really made Black Sabbath possible. Rather than stopping him from being a musician, he became one of the most influential musicians who have ever lived, especially at least in the rock idiom. But I would argue any genre. So that's some factoids. He did join Jethro Tull for 2 weeks. He did a song called "Song for Jeffrey" for the Rolling Stone Rock and Roll Circus film. He appeared on stage with Jethro Tull. However, it's pretty certain that their performance was not really live. Ian Anderson's vocals might have been, but the tracks were from the studio. So the guitars are probably done by Mick Abrams, the original guitar player, and Tony was just miming. So you can't actually hear Tony Iommi playing with Jethro Tull for real unless there's some rehearsal tape that's floating around, in limbo, and somebody's going to resurface, reclaim it one day. Maybe Ian Anderson will get on that before he passes. So that's where we're at. So let me continue with the introduction. In 1979, mutual dissatisfaction between popular lead vocalist and Ozzy Osbourne and the rest of the band led to his departure and replacement with ex-Rainbow lead singer Ronnie James Dio. Okay, so what happened here, to clarify, this is one of those things that everyone always gets wrong or has their own kind of fanfic they want to write about it. To be clear, Ozzy, in 1977, they had done the Technical Ecstasy album, and Ozzy was kind of going through the motions. That's really the first album where they were doing more straight-ahead rock. They weren't doing the sludgy, heavy metal or the prog rock kind of things they'd done on the prior 2 or 3 albums. Now it's still heavy as hell, but it was a little more conventional. However, it was very passionately played. But Ozzy's vocals, compared to the prior album Sabotage, they went way down in quality. They became a lot closer to how he has sung ever since, where he's kind of crutching on the quality of his voice, that unique sound he has, rather than really any singing or ability or expressive dramatic ability. The last song on Sabotage, The Writ, is probably the climax of Ozzy's talent as a top-notch vocalist. He's had moments since then, but that was pretty much kind of the end, at least as the way I see it. He was trying to put together a new band. I was going to call it Blizzard of Oz. Get it? And there were several people he had talked to about being in the band, some really cool people, and of course I've forgotten who they were. Sorry, again, I forgot some important facts, but not as important, but it's interesting. There were people who were in other hard rock groups of the era. So, he wanted to assemble kind of, I guess, a super group of sorts. Um, so uh, he he quit, and he was promptly replaced by Dave Walker, who had sang for Savoy Brown and for Fleetwood Mac during the Bob Welch, Danny Kirwan era of Fleetwood Mac. And um, they recorded, they did some demo, kind of basic demo work. But one song they came up with is called Junior's Eyes. Factoid about Junior's Eyes. So Junior's Eyes was a band that had opened for Sabbath, maybe around 70, 71. I don't know what the band named themselves after, but the song was named after the band, Junior's Eyes. So Geezer wrote some lyrics, as he always did, and the band, with Dave Walker on lead, appeared on a British television show. I don't remember if there's live footage of that or not, or if I've ever seen live footage, but the audio recording is pretty easy to find. And he sounds incredible to me. I mean, he doesn't sound as incredible as some of the singers after him, and he doesn't sound quite as fitting to Sabbath as Ozzy. But he would have been fine probably to record their next album, which evolved into Heaven and Hell. But that's a whole. We're getting to that. Well, the record label came in '78, came to them and said, "Hey, get Ozzy back because we want to do the 10-year anniversary, because '68 was 10-year anniversary of the four of them getting together, even though they didn't take the Sabbath name till '69." By the way, I'd mentioned that they recorded their first album in late '69. I believe it was November. It came out early '70, the first couple of months of 1970. And then Paranoid came out just a few months later. So within a year, they'd gone from recording their very first album to having a big hit album. They're pretty prolific back then as far as recording and touring. So much so that it took a strain on them over the years, and then they used drugs more and more to kind of get through all that. So they brought Ozzy back in. They booted Dave Walker. They did the Never Say Die 10th anniversary tour, and then Ozzy was fired. Tony felt that Ozzy just didn't fit into the band anymore. Tony wanted to go in a different direction, writing-wise, and Ozzy he didn't think was going to be up for it. He dispatched Bill Ward to break the news to Ozzy. That was like Ozzy's best friend in the band. And Tony Iommi carried on. And over the next year, he and Bill Ward continued to work on new material. Geezer Butler quit the band due to a variety of personal issues. So they brought in Jeff Nichols. Jeff Nichols was the bass player for a group that Tony Iommi had produced called Quartz. And he played bass. So the three of these guys, it really began, Bill and Tony were working together, but before they got Jeff Nichols in, as I understand it, that's when Ronnie James Dio and Tony Iommi got hooked up. And I believe it was Sharon Osbourne who recommended Dio to Iommi, believe it or not. And Dio had just recently quit Rainbow. It was kind of the peak of Rainbow, right? With the Rainbow classic, Rainbow, Long Live Rock and Roll, that was the last one. That's the classic album, too. I was going to say Rising, but that's before it. But Long Live Rock and Roll is an incredible album, too. But Dio and Blackmore had a total permanent falling out. So Dio and Tony started writing together a little bit, jamming. Dio, I believe, brought a bass, or Tony had a bass, and he had played bass in Ronnie Dio and the Prophets, and originally in Elf before he just switched to only vocals. And so they worked out the music and lyrics, the very first session to Children of the Sea. And this is a very magical, I dare I say, alchemical song, alchemical creation of Tony and Dio and their respective creative energies. So then they drafted in Jeff Nichols on bass, and they worked out most of the album, Heaven and Hell. At some point, Jeff was switched to keyboards, and for a short time, Dio brought in Craig Gruber, the bassist from Rainbow, who had been fired by Blackmore. Before that, he was the bassist for Elf. So he and Dio had known each other for many years. So Craig Gruber, it's debatable that he may have written some of the bass lines on the album. The Heaven and Hell kind of loping bass line, that was written by Jeff Nichols. And that a tape of that first really good take of them doing that, the Dio, Nichols, Iommi, and Ward, recently came out and was published on Jeff Nichols' YouTube channel. And it's incredible, really a treasure that's kind of unearthed. So, next thing you know, Gruber's out and Geezer came back. And that's really probably what Tony and Bill wanted all along. So Geezer came back, but the album had been written. So Dio had written the lyrics, but so he had first album that Geezer had no lyrics written on. And he really didn't have any music on it either, because he had always co-written their music as well. But they had one last song to work on. It turned out to be Neon Nights, and Geezer did co-write the music and arrangements for Neon Nights. So that's where we stand. So let me continue with my old introduction. Despite Sabbath's continuing success, Dio was replaced 4 years later with ex-Deep Purple frontman Ian Gillan, and the band's sound became even more iconoclastic. After Gillan and original drummer Bill Ward departed, the band went through a number of lineup changes over the next decade, including a reunion with Dio and a long-term alliance with journeyman vocalist Tony Martin, who showed a tremendous loyalty to the group. Yes. So, that whole period I've talked about in some of these other videos, probably in too much depth, the lineups and everything, but real quick, during the Mob Rules tour, they were recording material for Live Evil. And there was a lot of drugs and alcohol being taken, not as much by Dio as by Tony and Geezer. And there came to be these ego clashes. They were disputing over the silliness over who was sneaking into the studio allegedly and turning up their own tracks, and then the next night the other party would do the same. It's like totally ridiculous. And Dio has admitted, since then, they were all being kind of immature and ego driven, and they've all admitted there were some substances involved. So Dio was out. And their drummer, Vinny Appice, who had replaced Bill, went with Dio, and they formed the band Dio. After that, Bill Ward came back, and still troubled, but back in the fold, and they got Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. Well, Deep Purple had long been defunct by then, but they later regrouped after this. But before that happens, Ian Gillan commits to Black Sabbath. I don't know if he committed to a year or one album or whatever, because the attempts to reunite the classic Deep Purple lineup were kind of going on behind the scenes. The machinery was grinding towards that. Gillan recorded a classic album, Born Again, and did a great tour. Bill could not do the tour. So again, he had to leave the band. He was replaced by Tony's old friend Bev Bevan from Electric Light Orchestra. And Jeff Nichols was still on keys, and that five-man lineup did the incredible Born Again tour. And then things started to splinter a good bit. Bill came back to the band yet again, and they briefly had a singer named Dave Donato, and they worked out some demos with him. This guy did not stay in the band very long. He was briefly announced as the official lead singer. They auditioned Ron Keel, who had been in Steeler, I believe, with Yngwie Malmsteen when he was an unknown, and Keel later had his own band, Keel, kind of like Dio. You see a pattern here. And essentially, they didn't find a new lead singer. And, Geezer left again, and things were kind of a little bit in limbo. So Tony decided to do a solo album and use a lot of the material that he was working up with Dave Donato on vocals. But, he scrubbed Donato's lyrics and vocals. And some of the lyrics might have been Geezer's, I'm not sure. Those demos aren't very good. I've heard them. But that material became his solo album, Seventh Star, which the record label insisted he make a Black Sabbath album. And so for vocals, he got the incredible Glenn Hughes, who'd been in Trapeze and Deep Purple, and they were buddies, and they did Seventh Star. He got a whole new rhythm section to work on the album. So after all, it really wasn't originally Sabbath, but Jeff Nichols was still with him. So only one member besides Tony Iommi carried over. And by the time the tour got underway, Glenn Hughes only did a few shows and then had to drop out. Was replaced by a guy named Ray Gillen, no relation to Ian Gillen. So, to make a long story short, Ray Gillen left and had already recorded the next album, Eternal Idol, and they brought in Tony Martin, and Tony Martin re-recorded all the vocals like in a couple of days, and I personally prefer his vocals much to Ray Gillen's. That's just me. A lot of people don't feel that way, but that's okay. But by this time, the band had splintered again. Even the Seventh Star band, people were in and out. The Eternal Idol lineup was different. And it really took a while for any kind of stability to come to the band. I mean, Cozy Powell joined on drums, and, Cozy, Jeff, Tony, and Tony had a pretty solid thing for a few years. But then they got Dio and Geezer back. Dio and Geezer had reunited with each other, and they approached Tony. So Tony dismantled the finally stable band and got the Mob Rules lineup back together. They did Dehumanizer, which I think is the last great album recorded under the name Black Sabbath. And then we move forward. So where I've got here, amazingly, they regrouped with their original lineup in the late 90s and toured intermittently for the next decade before reuniting with Dio and second drummer Vinny Appice and calling their act Heaven and Hell. After Dio's tragic death, Butler and Iommi reverted to the name Black Sabbath and recorded their first studio album with Ozzy after 35 years and are currently touring to support it, as I wrote this. Who knows what the future holds for this iconic band whose tempestuous career has matched the intensity of their music. And then I kind of went on about, what this article was about, how I was going to do it, but I've already told you all that, and also what Black Sabbath meant to me, and etc. But I've gone over that on other videos too. So let's just do the countdown since we're already way, way into this video time-wise, and I'll try to sum these up here. So number 19, my least favorite and weakest Black Sabbath album, Forbidden, 1995. So Forbidden has Tony Iommi, Tony Martin on vocals, Jeff Nichols keyboards, Cozy Powell drums, Neil Murray on bass, and for the first time, a guest vocalist of all people, Ice-T. So I wrote at the beginning of this that Forbidden is surely the nadir of the mighty Sabbath catalog. Yeah, I'll stick by that. Forbidden is kind of slack, uninspired. Some catchy parts. It strays so far from what made Sabbath. Uninspired, just the very definition of uninspired. It did have one great song, Kiss of Death. I don't really like that title, but it was a good song, maybe a great song. I don't know. It was the last song on the album, and that was kind of the end of the whole era. But I enjoyed that one. But man, it was quite a slog through that album to get to that song. Some people will swear by this album, though. There's some massive adherence to it, but I'm not one of them. One thing I noted in this article that a lot of people are going to have a kind of permanent bias towards whatever lineup the band had when they were first introduced to it. So that was their initial imprinting. So for me, it was like the Dio era giving way to the Gillan era into the Hughes era. That was my kind of initial imprinting. So that's kind of like my Black Sabbath. However, I adore the Ozzy albums. Um, I'm hard on Ozzy sometimes, and there's lots of good reasons why, some of which I've mentioned in other videos. I'll probably mention some here. But Ozzy with Black Sabbath in the studio, and the original albums, I have no qualms with absolutely loving. So, moving on down the list, the 18th Black Sabbath album for me is Cross Purposes from 1994. This one had Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler back on bass, Tony Martin, Jeff Nichols, and Bobby Rondinelli on drums. And I had written here, this is the second weakest Sabbath studio album, only marginally. I agree with that. Again, it's really like a lack of inspiration, a lack of new ideas. Even though Geezer was back in the band and wrote a lot of the lyrics, I think, or at least some, his influence really didn't do a lot. And actually, he really probably should have written all the lyrics, but I believe Tony Martin and Jeff Nichols collaborated and did the lion's share, as they had been on their last couple albums together with that lineup. A song called Virtual Death that's pretty cool. It's Geezer's riff, which was a song that Geezer had written, I believe, for his band GZR originally. Dying for Love is their ballad, their power ballad. And, the guitar playing's nice. Tony's great on the album, Tony Iommi, for the most part. Tony Martin, he's stronger than he ended up being on Forbidden, but his vocals were beginning to kind of become a bit rougher. And really just the whole Enterprise, I don't know, off the mark. So let's move on. Number 17 is the album called 13, which came out in 2013, which is why it's called 13. And this is the original lineup, partially, of Black Sabbath. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, Ozzy Osbourne back on vocals, and Brad Wilk on drums, and Mike Exeter on keyboards. I know nothing about Mike Exeter. My initial comment on this album was, as H.P. Lovecraft might have put it, this may well be the album that should not be. And then I went on to say how By Rights the Devil You Know should have been the 19th Sabbath studio album, but for various reasons, the band did not use the name Black Sabbath. They went with Heaven and Hell. So the next Black Sabbath album became the first Sabbath album with Ozzy Osbourne singing lead on a studio album in 35 years. This album won a Grammy. I think it was kind of like after the fact, like we should go ahead and get Sabbath a Grammy. They've been around forever. Not necessarily for 13, kind of the way they do with Oscars. The first song, God is Dead, the beginning of the end is the first song. It's a really good song. And then God is Dead is really incredible. But this album's filled with weaknesses. I don't like the drums. The keyboards they're barely even there. Tony sounds great. He's done some good work on it, and so does Geezer. Ozzy does some effective work on some tracks, like God is Dead, but overall, it's the too nasally, modern Ozzy sound of his last several studio solo albums before this. I just don't think, again, a lack of inspiration. When Rick Rubin's kind of much touted production kind of fell short. He really didn't push the band sonically, and I would kind of hope he would. It seems like he was trying to push them back into this, just be heavy as hell kind of direction, and keep Ozzy in tune and grind out some tracks. So 13 is another one people have this enormous passion for, a lot of people, but I don't feel it. I think it's, like I said, one of their weakest albums. It's number 17. So number 16 is Tyr, Tyr, after the Norse god, 1990. This is with Tony Iommi, Tony Martin, Jeff Nichols, Cozy Powell on drums, Neil Murray on bass. So this is the first album with Neil Murray on bass. He had played with Whitesnake from the beginning up until their huge breakthrough in the mid-'80s. Um, and then after that, David Coverdale kind of gave him the sack, and he just wandered from band to band. But he ended up in Sabbath, and him and Cozy had worked together before. So this is like a solid lineup, and I think Tony Iommi was hoping this was going to be the solid Sabbath lineup moving forward. They have a song called um, "Feels Good to Me," which was their single, and a kind of a cheesy music video, but it's a great power ballad. I mean, it's not brilliant, but I mean, it's really good for what it is. The video is pretty silly. Um, the band sounds good together. Uh, it's kind of an attempt to do a concept album of sorts. There's a few song cycles dedicated to Norse mythology, at least, cosmetically to do a Norse mythology. Battle of Tyr, Odin's Court, Valhalla. Jeff Nichols is writing a lot of lyrics apparently, and there's a lot of keyboards. Um, I don't know though. I don't think they were quite up to the lyrical ability of, say, Geezer Butler or Ronnie Dio. So the mythological subject matter could have been handled much grander fashion, but it's kind of lackluster. But I do think Tyr was the last serious attempt by the Tony Martin lineup to do anything remotely progressive or interesting. Cross Purposes and Forbidden, as noted, pretty mundane. So let's move on to, let's see, we're on number 15, Headless Cross, 1989. This is the same lineup that was on Tyr, except prior to Neil Murray, there was Lawrence Cottle. He plays bass on the album, and Brian May from Queen becomes the first and only guest guitar player on a Black Sabbath album. Him and Tony in real life being practically best friends, which is cool because for a long time they were my two favorite guitar players. Brian May was the first rock guitar player I really got passionate about, and of course Tony has been my favorite for many years. His solo is okay. It's not a classic Brian May solo, but it's fine. It's a lot better than Tyr. This is an album that has a huge following. I'm not among them, but I get it. It does have some cool songs. When Death Calls is a really great song, and Brian May did the solo. Killing the Spirit World is like a catchy pop song almost, but with these kind of crazy metaphysical lyrics. I believe Jeff Nichols probably wrote most of the lyrics to this album with some help from Tony Martin. And they're pretty good. I mean, they're uneven. There's a little too much of the back to the devil this, the devil that, and Satan's going to get you, which was never really a part of the original Black Sabbath as a going concern. I mean, on the Ozzy albums, there's maybe 3 songs with that kind of theme, subject matter, maybe 4, 5 tops out of 8 albums. With Dio, a couple at most. But they kind of homed in on this as their big theme, this whole kind of occult supernatural. But a lot of it's kind of stock, cliched imagery, unfortunately. So, Headless Cross is, it's not a failure. I don't know if it's a success, but it did get them more attention and kind of renew interest in the band because they were kind of heading down on a big decline. So my computer is telling me that it may be running out of juice soon. So we're going to have to stop there. So, yeah. So we've done like, I'm going to scroll back up here. Probably take too long before it conks out on us. Yeah. Okay, so 19, 18 is Cross Purposes, 17 is 13, 16 is Tyr, and 15 is Headless Cross. So we're going to go ahead and do the next 14, I guess, on the next video. So we're not up to the top 10 yet. I will tell you the number 14 is going to be Never Say Die, the last Ozzy album for 35 years. So I'll rejoin you soon. I don't know when I'll record the follow-up, but it shouldn't be too hard to do since I've got this article as kind of my guide. So thanks for listening. Sorry I had to cut out soon, but it has been 40 minutes and I threw a lot of trivia and tidbits in there. So we'll get back with the countdown very soon. Thanks for watching.